Why don't we get started with practice test 3? We're going to continue kind of going through the writing and language um, concepts in terms of understanding the grammar concepts and kind of the perspectives that we've been looking at in terms of which what the questions are like, if they're on a word level, if they're on a sentence level, or if they're in dealing more with our kind of rhetorical strategies that we're dealing with when we're writing. So we're going to get into all of that today again, but we are going to first start off with practice test 3. Does anyone have any questions about the reading that you've been doing for the last few weeks? Just because I haven't really heard from anyone regarding that. So I'm assuming all of you are comfortable with the concepts discussed in the reading, especially regarding like the SAT essay. Today is session 7, so we only have one more session scheduled next week. So I just want to make sure that everyone understands what we kind of covered in the different chapters, which we've loosely discussed about in terms of our particular approaches to the different section for the evidence-based reading and the writing and language tests. We also did at the very beginning of the video series ended up going through of the SAT session. We kind of started going through what you need, what you really need for the essay. And we'll talk more about that next week in terms of the specifics for the essay for those of you taking it. But again, as I said at the beginning of the class, like 7 weeks ago now, we're basically with the essay, the SAT is really phasing it out. So students really aren't going to be seeing it on future exams, or at least on this next grouping of exams after June. So June is really kind of the last opportunity to really take the SAT essay if you're planning to take it. And so really, I mean, what colleges are going to be looking more at are your college application essays and any other course material, any other types of essays and writing that you've done. So it's not to say that writing isn't important. It clearly is because there's a writing and language test on this SAT, but it's not going to be kind of the end all be all of your writing career. They're going to be looking more specifically at your classes and your work in your classes to get a better feel for where they should place you in terms of your writing level when you enter college. And a lot of schools also do their own kind of formal assessment and placement of students once they accept them. So you may have to contend with that, but that's another issue entirely. So anyway, getting back to practice test 3, and the reading. Does anyone have any questions on any of the chapters 1 through 14, that I had you read over the last few weeks? What your homework included this past week was kind of just reviewing those chapters, continuing to kind of internalize the types of questions, the section breakdown, the timing, all of that for your SAT. So if no one has any questions, then we can just dive right into practice test 3. I won't know if you have questions unless you tell me. So please tell me if you do have questions, or you can email me privately if you like. That's also completely viable. The essay is separate. It is scored separately, but it goes into your cumulative score. So we had a question here regarding the scoring of the essay, which I'll get into that more in depth next week when we kind of do a quick overview of the essay itself. So I don't want to spend that much time on that today. It does contribute to your overall score, but it goes into kind of the, like if we actually look at chapters 1 to 4 kind of go over that in your reading. So look through the reading. The first few chapters give a full breakdown in terms of the scoring parameters and the specific kind of how they deal with the SAT essay. But like I said, even if you are taking the essay this time, they are in the process of basically phasing out the essay. So it's going to be, they're not going to be considering it quite as extensive, like as much as the rest of the SAT. So you do want to do your best on it. They're basically just testing to see whether or not you're a good writer and whether or not you know standard writing and language conventions and techniques for writing and editing. So it's kind of an extension of the writing and language test because it's requiring you to demonstrate your ability to write. So a lot of the skills that you're being tested on in the essay are found on the writing and language test, which is kind of another reason why they're phasing it out, I think, because a lot of the skills are the same as the writing and language test. It's just that they're not going to have you actually do the physical application of doing the writing process yourself for this exam, at least for the time being, if not going forward. And I think eventually the ACT and other kind of standardized testing tests are really going to kind of go for that as well. Although state assessments will probably still include writing because they have benchmarks that they need to make sure that you meet for particular grade levels. So anyway, does that kind of address your question for now? I will go over the scoring for the essay next week when we cover the essay. But I do want to get to the writing and language test just because we still have content to kind of go through. So without further ado, let's kind of just focus on questions from practice test 3 then, if no one has any other questions about the reading that you've been doing over the last few weeks. How did practice test 3 go for everyone? Do you feel confident in the kind of strategies that we've been employing? Do you feel more comfortable with the material? Because by now you should have a solid understanding of how to do the reading strategies and when to adjust your strategy based on your timing. So really, I mean, you should be pros at this point in terms of your employing the strategies, employing the kind of coding that I recommended, as well as for identifying different types of questions in the reading test, as well as in the writing and language test, in terms of understanding whether it's a grammar question or whether it's a dealing with a writing based question or a flow of ideas type question, all of these. So everyone should be at least starting to be familiar with, if not already very familiar with, how the reading test works, what's on it, what types of questions they are, and how to answer them, as well as with the writing and language test. So at this point, it's just really a matter of continuing to practice and refine your approach to the test. And truthfully, like the more you practice for this exam, the more practice tests you do, the more kind of like workshopping you do with individual question types for ones that you're struggling with, the easier the test is going to be for you, because it's a matter of being able to get yourself focused come exam day, and to be able to focus on just keeping track of your timing as you go through each section, and to be able to employ the strategies and adjust your strategy as necessary for the reading test in particular, as well as kind of employing things like process of elimination, just kind of the basic skills that we've been going over that um, have been kind of building to help you um, break down the test so it's less overwhelming. So really, at this point, I think that it's more a matter of practice for everyone and just kind of reinforcing those ideas than it is that you need to be learning brand new skills. I mean, even with the craziness of the grammar, and the range of questions that you end up being asked on the writing and language test, don't let that throw you off, because when it comes down to it, you know your language, you've gone through numerous years of schooling. You should be well aware of standard English conventions, in terms of writing, in terms of the kinds of things like that your teachers have you at like look for when you're analyzing or assessing or critiquing and or doing peer review for another person's writing, as well as when you're doing more critical reading from your texts in class, that you're really focused on looking at what is this author trying to say and how are they conveying it, what techniques are they using to convey their message to me, why does their message matter, like looking at all those kinds of critical questions that you ask pretty much every day in any class that you're in, whether even if it's a math class. I mean, I think you still even ask those types of questions because you still end up having to do writing in pretty much every class at some point. And you have to be able to, in terms of like a math class, you have to be able to explain your logic through like proofs or kind of solving the step-by-step process of solving an equation. So you're still employing logic and reasoning. You're still looking for the flow of ideas of, oh, this is how you got this particular answer. So all of these skills, you have this. I know all of you do. So it's just a matter of getting yourself to the point where you feel comfortable based on how much you've practiced. And that comes with time, and that comes with considerable practice, in terms of just being as familiar as possible with this test and how to beat it. I mean, we've gone through different strategies for the reading test and the writing and language test. The writing and language test being mostly your ability to understand English, written English, to be able to understand what's appropriate in formal writing. In most cases, it's formal writing that we're dealing with. But you also want to be able to understand how to convey ideas. And these are all skills that you've been doing since kind of time out of mind, since you first started school, since you first started thinking, really, which is much longer than the time that you've been at school. So you've got this. I know that. So looking at practice test 3, if no one has any questions on the reading. I think there was one question. It depends on where you, we have a question regarding the, whether or not you're doing testing conditions in person or if you're doing them on a computer. I think most students typically take it, and even throughout the whole pandemic, most students have been taking it in person still, within CDC guidelines, for just pandemic guidelines. So in terms of the spacing of students and the number of students allowed in a particular classroom, depending on your testing location, you want to check when, with your registration information for the test, which you can do through the College Board's website, um, to confirm your specific testing location and date and time and all of the kind of pertinent information that you need to take with you when you go for exam day. So I think that there have been instances where the the um, the test has been on the computer, in which case that's also another reason why the SAT is kind of eliminating the need for the writing section. I mean, for the essay section, because it's much easier to score a multiple choice section than it is to have to go through and then get readers to read through the essays. So for moving things online, I think that that would be an easier kind of solution there. It depends on, so the answer to your question is that it really depends on your specific testing circumstances, like where your location, what the closest testing location is for you for the SAT. A lot of the time, your school is where you're going to be going for the test. But you have to check about the particular testing circumstances from when you registered, based on when you registered. Your teachers at school, if you're doing this through your school, should have that information about your testing environment, about where specifically it is, if you signed up through your school. So check with them. To my knowledge, though, most students are still working in person to do the SAT, because they need to be able to get they need your answer sheet so that they can put it through the reader to submit, to be able to obtain your answers, basically. So I think that for the most part, they're trying to do it in person, but there may be some isolated like instances, especially due to the pandemic, where it might be online. But do yourself a favor and double check with the school or the college board, where you've registered for your exam, and confirm your dates for your exam, as well as any specific testing day requirements, because certain locations will require you to bring ID, to bring kind of all of your supplies for testing day. But I do know that a lot of changes have recently happened. Like, for instance, the AP, a bunch of the AP exams went online, when initially they were being done in person, earlier this spring. So you want to be able to double check, specifically with your school, or directly with the college board, if you signed up directly through the college board. So their website, the College Board's website, is, I gave it to everyone a while ago. But for those of you who don't know, I'm gonna put the link in the chat. So that should be, you want to look for anything related to the SAT. So actually I can go, let me stop sharing for a second and we can all kind of take a quick look at it. You shouldn't have to bring your Chromebook the day of, but again, double check with your, like they should be providing computers if you need a computer, unless they tell you specifically to bring your own laptop, which I don't really think that they would, because not everyone may have a laptop. So I don't foresee you going to a testing location and bringing your own computer. That's not correct at all. There are specific testing locations, especially if you take the SAT or GRE. Like, you can go. It just depends on where you've registered. So you really need to check that. Like you can go to specific, like ETS has a lot of, the education testing board really has a lot of different testing sites in terms of where, in which case you would be sent to a particular testing location, testing center, and then you would be taking the exam directly through their computers in a proctored test setting. But in most cases for SAT, you're going to be taking it at your school or at another kind of place in your region where you are in a classroom with other students and you're physically there taking the test. So if everyone can kind of see the College Board website here, okay. If you go to, you can go to register for the SAT. If you haven't, I mean, everyone in this class should have already. But that kind of just provides that will connect you to your own account. Like you can sign into your account for the College Board. You can find information related to the SAT, like SAT practice, SAT deadlines, check for test center closings. All of that information is available on the College Board website, which I did go over at the very beginning. And it's been kind of, it should have been in at least one or two of the chapters that I gave you for your assigned reading. So make sure you reread those sections because it's going to provide clear information about the SAT. But given that we still have the pandemic going on, you want to really double check on the College Board's website to confirm that you have the most up-to-date information and to stay on top of any like if you're doing the May 8th, if people, which would have already passed, but basically you would type in either the test center code or look by state and city, and you can find your particular test center this way. But you all should be able to find out for sure where your testing location is, and the kind of particulars, like what you need to know on test day. All of that information is available for you on the College Board. And if you ask your teachers at school, if you're taking the SAT directly through your school and registered through your school, they should have that information for you to clarify that. Okay? Does that make sense? And it will also include any materials you need to bring on test day, like what to bring on test day. They specifically have pages for that. You can look for the student pages. So, I mean, you can go to like taking the test, phone and like their electronic device policy, security measures, SAT school day, test day checklist. So what to bring on test day, all of that information's up here. ID requirements, calculator policy, etc. All of that is available on the SAT's website. You just need to, I mean, you can go again in the chat is that direct link. Okay. All right. So I don't want to take more time about that. I want us to kind of get back to okay, so we have another question regarding kind of the College Board. So to make a College Board profile, everyone should have one already based on, like if you've registered for the SAT, you should have one already, an account already with them. It's basically like once you've registered for the SAT, you should be able to just sign in. Like you would go to sign in, type in the username and password that you used when you created it, and create it when you registered, basically. And it will take you to additional resources. I've been through all this before at the very beginning of our classes. So, and it's also reiterated in the reading that you were supposed to do for chapters 1 to 14. So they do provide that, especially in the very early chapters. So if you haven't done the reading, everyone needs to go back and do the reading. And also explore the College Board website. Because I mean, right now it's almost 9:30 and we haven't even had a chance to dive into our content for this section. So I've been taking a lot of time with this today. And I think we should dive right into content now. So these are great questions. If you still have questions, please email me and I'd be happy to address them. But everyone really needs to be able to do the reading. I've done the reading up until this point, and to explore the College Board's website because they have a lot of excellent resources. Like that's where a lot of your practice tests have been coming from. Like the majority, all of your practice tests have been coming from the College Board's website. So you need to pay attention to little fine details in order to understand what's going on in the class. Okay. But these are excellent questions. But we need to kind of move on at the moment. So if you don't remember your password or anything for signing into your account on the College Board, you can follow the troubleshooting advice, which I gave to everyone at the very beginning in one of my handouts to you. So you have all of that information. You just need to read through it and find it. Okay. All right. So we're going to change gears. All right, so for those of you who are just joining us, we are going to be going over practice test 3, okay? Okay, what specific questions do you have on practice test 3 from your homework? I mean, at this point, we might not be able to get to all of them, but I do want to be able to get to some of them. So practice test 3, should be towards the end of your, near the end of your book. Trying to think of the specific pages. The specific pages should be in the homework email that went around. I can double check that. I guess I didn't give the page numbers, but the link, that you don't really need it at this moment because it's on screen. Okay, so any questions specifically from the reading test for practice test 3? Number 2. Okay. Okay. So number 2 for in passage 1. So this is dealing with, we kind of have a narrative going on. We have a literary passage here. So question 2 states in line 2, turn most nearly means. So this is one of our vocabulary and context questions. So it has to do with diction. So that means the meaning of a word, and any kind of additional implied meanings for that word or associated meanings with that word in terms of its connotation or denotation. So vocabulary and context is looking specifically at a word and trying to understand what it means in a given context. That's all it means, okay? It's also a usage function question, okay? Because it has to do with how this word is being used and how the author is specifically using it in this context, what their intended meaning is, okay? So looking at question 2, so if we look at line 2, turn. So we have line 1, Lady Carlotta stepped out on the platform of the small wayside station and took a turn or two up and down its uninteresting length to kill time till the train should be pleased to proceed on its way. So yes, I did just read more than the specific line that they mentioned, because one thing that you need to always do is look at a word in the context of a sentence, or sometimes even in a larger context of a paragraph, or even several paragraphs sometimes, depending on a particular what's going on in the passage, and how it's being used. So, or what the question specifically is asking. So here, took a turn or two up and down its uninteresting length. What do we kind of see there as, I mean, the options that they give us are slight movement, change in rotation, short walk, course correction. And obviously I have the right answer in here for us. So the turn that's being referred to is a short walk, but course correction doesn't really fit, because we've received kind of information of taking a turn or two up and down its uninteresting length. So we get this idea that she's moving and that she's walking from place to place, like from one end to the other. So that's kind of what's meant here. So it's not just a slight movement, because she's definitely covering ground. And it's not like a literal turn, like turn right here. It's or turn left, or go straight. Like we're not, it's not giving us a direction that she's going in specifically. It's dealing or changing our trajectory. It's dealing with taking a turn about the room, or taking a turn about a walkway, to kind of understand that we are talking about a short walk. She's pacing basically back and forth here and there. We even have it kind of established that she's trying to kill time, right? She's until the train would be ready to leave, right? So we kind of have that impression that she's being impatient. She doesn't want to just sit and wait. She needs to be moving in this case, okay? Does that make sense for this question? Okay. So question 4 is another one that we have. So here, this is an evidence support question. So this is one of our questions that usually follows a text detail or an inferencing question, which everyone should know based on the patterns that we've kind of been discussing about the reading test. So look back through the handouts that I've given you if you're unsure what I'm talking about here. So you can see that this question is preceded by an inferencing question, okay? Which means that I need to know the answer to this inferencing question before I can get to this evidence support question, okay? So I need to answer this one correctly in order to answer this one correctly, okay? Or to have a better chance of answering this one correctly. So as evidence support, it gives you specific textual references, so line numbers that are going to tell you whether or not, that's going to provide support for the ideas or answer to the question, the previous question, okay? So in the previous question, the passage most clearly implies that other people regarded Lady Carlotta as outspoken, tactful, ambitious, unfriendly. So you have to infer from the text that she's outspoken, okay? Based on which you can, like based on the evidence in the text. So the evidence support question then requires you to be able to go through the passage to examine these specific lines in the text and determine which one provides the best example that supports the answer in the previous question. So in this case, we're looking for examples of Lady Carlotta as being outspoken. And lines 10 to 14, which begin, certain of her acquaintances were wont to give her plentiful admonition as to the undesirability of interfering on behalf of a distressed animal, such interference being none of her business. So that's the sentence in question in terms of the evidence. But let's kind of think about that and see if it actually is telling us that she's being outspoken or alluding to the fact that she's outspoken. So certain of her acquaintances were wont to give her plentiful admonition. So basically, a number of people within her, like of her acquaintance, like people that she knew, maybe didn't really know well or knew her well, but people with which with whom she was familiar, would admonish her. So that's kind of like chastise or scold her about like her tendency to which was undesirable by the rest of the, like by the public, by those around her, like her interfering, like her interference, her kind of almost stubbornness and obstinacy to come to the aid of a distressed animal, or interference because they felt it was not her business to do that. So she kind of was a bit of a busybody and being a little bit too nosy, too kind of opinionated. That's really kind of what we can understand here. And we get that a lot in terms of her dialogue. So we understand that based on kind of her sort of, she is outspoken. I mean, the text kind of provides that evidence in here, but this particular set of lines gives the best response to that question. Does that make sense? So therefore, the answer for number 4 has to be A, because it's providing the most direct evidence of her being outspoken, because she's constantly being admonished, being kind of chastised or scolded by people who are around her. Like they're like, stop, you're not, like, stop being like, don't interfere where it's not your business to interfere, don't be so opinionated, don't be like, they're trying to control her in a way, and say like, you're not fitting into our standard, our norm here, so you need to stop being so opinionated, and kind of fulfill the role expected of a woman of your kind of background, okay, or your position in society. So this is very much a focus on society in this piece. Did anyone have any other questions from the reading, or can we dive into the writing and language test? No more questions on the reading? Okay. Then what about the writing and language test? Okay, so question 2 in the writing and language test. So here, so question 2, so we're dealing with the passage shed some light on the workplace. So this question is asking which choice provides the most appropriate introduction to the passage. So you have to think about what an introduction does, and also kind of think about it in terms of the whole passage itself, because it's introducing the central concepts of, or the thesis basically, of this passage. So it's an important section because it basically, it's supposed to be giving us sort of the general topic at the very beginning. So just like you would structure in a normal essay. And it's supposed to then kind of narrow down to the central core concept of the rest of the piece that's going to be discussed. So the structure is important in terms of um, the overall introduction. But let's kind of look at the context here for question 2. So I have also have noticed in here that the numbering system for this particular practice test was weird in terms of the actual numbers that were in the passage. So try to think of, I hope everyone kind of thought of them as like question 1, like the first one goes to question 1, the next one would go to the next question, etc., rather than getting confused by the differences in numbers. So I think that's an error, a massive error on the SAT makers, test makers part. So I apologize that if that was confusing for anyone, but that was definitely not anything that I had any control over for this situation. So here, looking at which choice provides the most appropriate introduction to the passage. So likely we're dealing with something at the very beginning, as you can see by the one in the passage. So studies have shown that employees are happier, healthier, and more productive when they work in an environment in which temperatures are carefully controlled. So that's the section we're looking at specifically. We're looking specifically at healthier and more, that section. So we're looking at kind of identifying whether or not that's an appropriate kind of introduction for this, like basically our like attention getter for this section, like our first sentence in our introductory paragraph. So A doesn't really work in this context. And we have kind of B is the right answer because it's pretty much, it's direct, it's ultimately connecting. So connecting directly to the main subject of the passage, which is what you want in your introduction. C doesn't really work because it's not really related in this context. D doesn't really work. I mean, these are just kind of inappropriate choices, but B is definitely spot on in terms of connecting as an introduction, connecting smoothly to our central concept or central subject of the passage, okay, as a whole. So if we read it as studies have shown that employees are happier, that affords them adequate amounts of natural light, doesn't make sense in this context. Okay, so in this case, yeah, their numbering is really weird here. So basically, like the most appropriate idea here, yeah, this one is just weird. So looking here affords them adequate amounts of natural light. So most appropriate introduction. So if we kind of look through the whole paragraph here, so studies have shown that employees are happier, healthier, and more productive when they work in an environment in which temperatures are carefully controlled. New buildings may be designed with these studies in mind, but many older buildings were not, resulting in spaces that often depend primarily on artificial lighting. While employers may balk at the expense of reconfiguring such buildings to increase the amount of natural light, the investment has been shown to be well worth it in the long run for employees and employers. So essentially, I think what they're asking us to look at here is determine whether or not, I mean, because for 2 is all the way down here. Circadian rhythms, which are controlled by the body's biological clocks, influence body temperature, hormone release, cycles of sleep and wakefulness, and other bodily functions. So even kind of looking here, we want something that is going to introduce this main concept of adequate amounts of natural light. That's kind of what this one comes down to. I think this is a poorly written question, especially given the kind of poor like inaccuracies with their numbering. So I'm not surprised that anyone got this particular question wrong, or had questions on it. So I think essentially you just have to do the best you can. So with the understanding that you have an introduction to the passage that you're dealing with, um, and that you're looking for an idea that relates back to the central concept, the main subject. That's what you're really looking for. So think of central idea, central concept. So your thesis, basically. So the thesis has mostly to do with um, giving natural light, like having adequate amounts of natural light. That's really what they're getting at, because it has to do with whether it's because of the expense of making sure you have more natural light in a workplace, or like I mean, just like the investment for it. That's really what they're talking about, is that in the long run, even if it costs a lot at the very beginning, it makes more sense for them in the long run. It'll pay off, by allowing their employees to feel more at ease, more comfortable, and happier, because they're in natural light as opposed to artificial light. So that's really kind of like the key idea in this passage. And the only kind of option that really expresses that is B. Okay, so that's kind of what you should take away from this. Their numbering in this particular in this section had been a disaster, pretty much. So does anyone have any other questions on any of the other ones from the writing and language test, or even back on the reading test? No? All right, well, everyone this week will receive a copy of my annotations for the practice test, for practice test 3. So that way you can kind of compare your own responses and your identification of the questions, to how I identified them. And then we can kind of go from there. So why don't we switch gears if no one has any other questions on specific questions from the test, from the practice test? Um, let's kind of look at some of the grammar concepts then. All right, so we're just going to pick up quickly where we were last time. So I know last time we kind of got through understanding things like subject and predicate, dealing with different types of articles, understanding really what a sentence is as a complete thought or idea. I want to kind of look like remember to last time we were talking about the 8 parts of speech. We were talking about subject, verb, object, or word order, and the importance of word order in the English language in order to convey meaning. And the how if we rearrange certain words in or words in a sentence, it can completely alter the meaning of the sentence. Um, and dealing with kind of understanding things like the phrases, clauses, sentences, and kind of the differences between them, and like effective writing techniques, like effective use of punctuation, and kind of understanding grammatical function in a sentence. All of these kinds of concepts, I think we sort of covered last time, up until kind of the point where I think we got to think we kind of wrapped up with kind of the about definite when we were dealing with adjectives and definite articles, but kind of understanding like the ingredients that you need for a sentence are you need a subject and you need a predicate. And in the simplest terms, a subject is always going to be who or what the sentence is about. And grammatically speaking, it will always be a noun, which is a person, place, thing, or idea or concept. Or it will be a pronoun, which is a word that can take the place of a noun in a sentence. Specifically for subject, for a pronoun that's taking the place of a subject of a sentence, a noun acting as a subject of a sentence, it would be what we call a subjective pronoun or subject pronoun, which is like a word like he, she, it, they, us. Well, they, we, you, I. All of those are examples of subject pronouns because they can take the place of a noun acting in the role as a subject of a sentence. So kind of moving on from there, unless anyone have any questions from what we went over last week before I kind of dive in here. I've said that a lot today. Okay, so just to recap, we have different types of sentences depending on how they're being used or what our intention is with them or what the purpose of using them is. So there are there are 4 basic categories of sentences. We have declarative, we have imperative, and we have interrogative and exclamatory. Okay, so declarative is where you're declaring something, you're stating something. It's a statement. So it's going to end in a period. Okay. Imperative, like so declarative sentences are when you have basically a you're stating a fact, you're making an observation. There's no you don't need a like an exclamation point or a question mark in this situation. Declarative is always going to end in a period. Okay. Imperative sentences deal with when you're making a request or you are issuing a command. Those are the 2 circumstances when you're using the imperative. So and imperative sentences can end in either a period or an exclamation point. So it depends on kind of the level of like the how strong of a command you're issuing or like the emotion behind your what you're saying. So that can affect it. So imperative sentences end in either a period or an exclamation point, exclamation mark. Okay. Interrogative sentences are when you're interrogating someone or you're asking questions of someone. Okay, so it's a question. Basically, you're asking something. So it's always going to end in a question mark. Okay, pretty straightforward here. Exclamatory sentences, when you're exclaiming something, you are like when you have a lot of emotion behind something, or you're shouting, you're showing emphasis, and kind of being very passionate about your expression of your thoughts, or you're angry, or you're warning someone to watch out for something. Like it's a, I mean, it just depends. Okay. But exclamatory, you're exclaiming information. You're exclaiming something. Types of clauses. So we have different types of clauses. We have independent clauses, which are a complete sentence. That's a sentence. So it's independent because it can stand on its own. Dependent or subordinate clauses cannot stand by themselves. They need to be attached to an independent clause. Subordinate clause is essentially another name for dependent clauses. So it depends on how you've been taught those kinds of concepts. And I mean, they're essentially the same thing, but dependent and subordinate clause are typically used interchangeably in terms of classifying this particular type of clause. So dependent or subordinate clauses can't stand by themselves. So unlike an independent clause, they need to be attached to an independent clause in order to be able to be part of a sentence. Otherwise, they're a fragment. Okay, does that make sense to everyone? All right, also, you have a parenthetical clause. So where you're kind of adding in information that's not, isn't directly isn't necessarily essential information that you're giving. It's basically additional information that you're adding. So it's kind of like superfluous or extra information here. We also have kind of different patterns of combining sentences. So we can rearrange parts of the predicate to be in front of a subject. We can change word order. We can rework our sentences so that they're not always structured the same way with subject verb, even though they're still following subject verb object or word order overall. They are able to kind of give us some variety so we can stay engaged with our reader and our audience. We have different types of sentences as well in types of paragraphs. So you're dealing with things like topic sentences. You're dealing with evidence and supporting details, explanatory or elaboratory sentences, transitional sentences, and concluding sentences, which can also be transitional sentences, depending on what else is in the particular paragraph. So even though, generally speaking, when we're doing formal writing, we're using declarative, we're writing using declarative sentences. You don't often see the imperative mode, and you don't often see the exclamatory mode in when you're dealing with formal writing, because essentially what you're doing, part of this type of writing has to do more with presenting fact and statements, making statements about the topic at hand. Okay, does that all make sense to people, to everyone? We also have kind of essay or argument structure. So it depends, I mean, this will depend on what type of text we're dealing with, what type of writing we're dealing with, and what our purpose is in writing, or what the message is that we're trying to convey and how. So our rhetorical strategies and different things like that will affect the overall structure. But typically it'll follow, like, you have paragraphs, you have kind of key sentences, you have like thesis statements, and you have an introductory paragraph, you have body paragraphs, you have a concluding paragraph. But thesis statement, argumentative claim, analytical claim, that's a specific type of sentence. So there are more than just the four basic types of sentences. But a thesis would fall under declarative. That's the category that it belongs to. Does that make sense to everyone? Yeah? Okay. Just to kind of move on here, when you're dealing with the writing and language test, you have you're looking at information on like the text on different levels. You might be looking at, like, a question might ask you to look, examine something from a word level in terms of like our vocabulary and context, or usage questions where we're asked to determine the meaning of a word in a given context. But it could also be dealing with a phrase level. So, like, how is this prepositional phrase related to the rest of the past, the rest of this sentence or the rest of this paragraph? Like different concepts like that. That would be an example of a phrase that you might see. Clause level, you're dealing with you're dealing with an entire sentence and an independent clause, or you're dealing with a dependent or subordinate clause that's underlined, or you're dealing with the parenthetical clause, where you have kind of offset information that's not necessarily essential to understand for the meaning of the sentence, the core meaning of the sentence. Does that all make sense? Any questions so far? All of this should really be very straightforward, in terms of kind of your understanding of essays, your understanding of writing, your understanding of kind of just how grammar works, why it works. So it's very intuitive, in terms of understanding what they're looking at. I just know that it can be challenging in terms of decoding what specifically they're looking at. Like, you understand what it is that they're asking you to find, but understanding the significance of why they're having you do it is the harder thing, for most students. So the detail levels of word, phrase, clause, and sentence are very detail oriented. They're very focused on small, like the small detail, the small details, minute details, that you're dealing with. You also have questions that are going to be focused more on main idea or the idea level, in terms of they're less focused on the grammatical structure and more focused on the structure of the ideas. Okay, so the formatting of your ideas, the expression, and the method of conveying ideas to your audience, okay, or to a writer's audience, okay. So those are going to be things that are more like main idea types of questions, deal more with paragraph level, kind of understanding. You're also understanding, so it can be on the paragraph level in terms of understanding the overall main idea of a particular paragraph in a larger work. It can also be focused on kind of the usage, the function of a particular paragraph. We see tons of those types of questions in our responses about understanding, why is this author using this paragraph here? Shouldn't it be here? Like, what happens if we flip it? Like, understanding kind of how ideas relate to each other and how to create flow. So you're dealing, when I refer to flow, I'm really feeling like referring to the flow of ideas. So the kind of logical progression of ideas, and the kind of clarity that you would expect in terms of going from idea A to B to C to D to E to Z, like understanding all of those different kinds of ideas, being able to have logic and reason, like support your argument with logic and reasoning, to be clear and concise, to kind of understand paragraph structure, so topic sentences. So of these kinds of examples up here, topic sentences, evidence supporting details, explanatory, elaboratory sentences, transitional sentences, concluding sentences. That's focused much more on a paragraph level in terms of our understanding of the structure needed to have a paragraph, okay? And typically, I mean, rule of thumb is about 5 to 7 sentences per paragraph, roughly. If you have more than that, I mean, there are going to be instances when there's a much longer paragraph, or a much shorter paragraph. But again, that is more of a stylistic change. by an author that they make for a specific purpose, or in a particular context. So paragraph structure, the function, the organization overall of ideas, and the kind of organizational structure overall. Whereas with the detail level, like the sentence level, you're dealing with the detail level organization of particular words in a sentence to express one idea, basically. Or to contribute to the expression of one idea, or the idea it convey, the main central idea of a sentence itself, rather than focusing on like the central idea, the main idea of a paragraph itself, or even an essay, a larger work. So main idea tends to be paragraph level. It deals with flow of ideas, logic, reasoning, paragraph structure, function, organization. It also deals with varied sentence structure. So our ability to recognize that we can't have every single sentence the same in terms of its structure, because we're going to lose our reader. We know that. Humans need variety, or we get bored. We zone out, and we can't focus if every single sentence is structured the same way, because that's not even how language works. Language is varied. It's always going to be diverse. There's always going to be many different ways to convey the same idea, or even to convey different ideas. Like there are, I mean, imagine if everything we thought was just the same. Like everyone had the exact same idea, presented it in the exact same, like how boring everything would be. I think that's a nightmare. I personally would not want to have to deal with that. But anyway, so that's kind of why varying your sentence structure really matters, because you need to keep your audience engaged. You need to also understand how language works and how we can play with language to restructure it so that we're still keeping that subject, verb, object, word order that's integral to conveying our meaning in English language, while also still giving ourselves variety and having flexibility in terms of our arrangement, and kind of our ideas and of our sentences in a larger work. Does that make sense to everyone? Yeah. Also transitions between ideas. So like the idea level also deals with transitions between ideas. That's a key concept here. You deal with being able to create flow, be able to create cohesion, being concise, being precise in terms of, and accurate in terms of segueing from one idea to the next. Okay. And if you skip a step in there, like you get from point A to C, but you didn't explain point B, someone is going to be confused at some point. So that's why we try to smoothly transition from one idea to another, so that people can follow our train of thought and take believe what we take what we say seriously, to be able to I mean, depending on the context. I mean, if we're joking, that would be one thing, but just to be able to help them understand so that we can be better communicators with one another. I mean, that's ultimately what we're trying to do here. Okay, so in addition to the detail level and the main idea or idea level, you're dealing with global levels. So global kind of levels, what I mean by that is, instead of just focusing in on specific details, tiny details, or even just a central idea in a particular paragraph, the global level really deals with the overall work. Okay, so that would be like the entire essay as a whole, the entire narrative as a whole. It's dealing, or even like an entire chapter. You could go that far. I mean, you could break it down to that tiny if you're dealing with an element, a broader element than just a I mean, like, it depends on the type of source that you're dealing with, or the type of writing you're dealing with. But essentially, global level kind of looks at central concepts, thesis, claim, motif, themes, all of those types of things. That's the essence of the global perspective, is really to look at the context in a particular situation or a particular text or a particular piece of writing for a particular subject, and to understand the cohesion, how everything fits together, how it smoothly transitions from one idea to the next. So it's very much connected to our main idea or idea level type work, as well as to like elements of our details. But it's very much looking at everything working together as opposed to specific details. So it's looking for kind of overarching concepts, essentially, or patterns, or just all different kinds of key ideas, like underlying like currents within a work. Does that all make sense to everyone? Yeah. Word and syntax level questions. So just kind of a note here. You also have those. So these would be things like our detail. Okay, word and syntax is going to mostly deal with our detail level questions, but they can also deal with kind of larger paragraph or work as a whole, because syntax has to do with how we organize ideas and arrange ideas, as well as how we organize words and arrange words. So it's kind of a complex idea here, but basically word and syntax level questions are going to focus more on the minute details, so tiny little specific details. Okay, they're going to test your understanding of the 8 parts of speech, so basically the grammatical categories or classifications of words that we've discussed previously. You're also going to be dealing with it's going to require you to understand the organization, structure, and function of words, phrases, clauses in a sentence to create and convey meaning. So that's what it's going to have you do. It's also going to it can alter your understanding of a phrase, clause, sentence, paragraph, or passage, because placement in a sentence affects meaning and function in a sentence. This can also cause your understanding of ideas and related concepts to change, to evolve, or to alter in some way. Careless errors also frequently occur with these types of questions if you do not read carefully or have enough context for the isolated bit of grammar in the sentence, paragraph, or work as a whole. So pay attention when you have a syntax or like you have a grammatical construction, because in the writing and language test, because chances are they're only going to they're going to underline just part of the information that you really need in a broader framework of the sentence, which is why the sentence should always be the minimum framework that you're working in, so that you can understand what specifically that sentence is trying to say, and what a particular word is being used, like how it's being used in a sentence, in terms of the overall framework of that sentence, so that overall syntax of that sentence. And then also kind of sometimes you even have to, like when you're dealing with clauses, you have to definitely look kind of a little bit above or below, and or below the sentence in question, the part that's underlined, in order for you to have a clearer understanding of how ideas are connecting, whether or not the previous sentence or the following sentences are continuations of that isolated sentence's ideas, or if it's something different, if they need to be separated into different sentences. So just try to pay attention when you encounter a phrase, clause, sentence, paragraph, or passage level question. So basically any of these questions, really, you need to pay attention to what you're doing and understand whether or not you're dealing with understanding ideas, or if you are dealing with how the grammar fits together to create an idea, to express an idea. Okay. You also want to understand words in context. So vocabulary and context is key here. So diction, understanding word choice, and kind of any denotation or connotations going on with a particular word, and being able to analyze and assess the author's intended meaning, purpose, or stylistic choice. You're also going to, when you're dealing with style, there's flexibility for an author to pick and choose what they want to use and why. An author is always making, whether they're aware of it or not, they're always making deliberate choices. They're making specific choices about in order to convey their particular message to their audience, and also to achieve their particular purpose in writing. So that's whether it's to inform, to entertain, to argue, all of those different things. And then also dealing with what is it that they're trying to, what's the message that they're trying to convey? What's the meaning? What's the significance of things? Does that all make sense to everyone? Okay, and then kind of finally, I just want to go over global level questions here. So again, this is going to be something that's dealing with the overarching ideas in a passage, and the passage as a whole. So looking at specifically at cohesion, how things fit together, and whether or not it's logical, whether or not there's enough evidence to support the ideas, if there are any patterns in there, or what have you. But global level questions really focus on understanding of the standard structure and organization for particular writing genres. So like the structure of a narrative versus that of an argumentative essay. They're very differently, completely differently structured. But each of them achieves their own purpose based on, because they have different purposes too. So it ties in. So structure and organization is key to understanding what type of text you're dealing with. Global questions will also test your understanding of how ideas fit together and convey information. So this is cohesion. This is dealing with understanding how ideas flow from one to the next, and whether or not everything is relevant, or if you're being overly repetitive, like different patterns like that as well in terms of your expression of ideas. Global questions will deal with requiring you to know how to identify and correct issues in transitioning seamlessly from one idea to another. So it's connection of thoughts, connection of ideas from one thing to another. So are you using the most effective transition for this given situation? And if not, why? Why not? So you'll see a lot of questions like that. It's also going to test your logic and reasoning, as well as your kind of ability to analyze an author's writing techniques and use language and evidence to support their ideas. So it tests your ability to interpret data, to interpret information, and to assess and critique another person's writing, so that you can show your understanding of how grammar works and how writing and editing works. And that's kind of the point of this exercise for this entire writing and language test. Okay, so basically also focusing on things like your ability to effectively convey the author's message to an intended audience and any other audiences, if they're direct or indirect audiences, to achieve a particular purpose in writing. As well as requiring knowledge of writing and editorial choices, like those related to style, to tone, to context, to diction, to technique, and mechanics of language. So these are all things everyone should be familiar with from any English class you've ever taken, as well as any writing assignment you've ever had from any class, in terms of understanding your ability to be able to write or make editorial decisions for a particular purpose. Does that all make sense to everyone? Yeah. Again, this document was the one that we kind of started reviewing in lesson 5, in session 5. So everyone has a copy of this already. If for some reason you do not, please email me and I would be happy to share it with you again. For your homework this week, everyone is to do practice test 7. we'll send out an email with the practice test. So you're dealing with practice test 7. I want everyone to continue reviewing all those chapters, like chapters 1 to 14, in the text and come prepared next time, because next time is session 8, our last session, if you have any lingering questions. And remember that next week we will also be going over how to basically approach the essay, for those of you taking it. We'll spend a little bit of time kind of combing through the essay and kind of how to break it down, how to best approach this. But practice test 7 for the reading and like evidence-based reading test and the writing and language test, as well as for anyone taking the essay, it would be essay 7 that you would have to do for this week. And review your notes, make note of anything that you need to go over with me next week. Because if I don't hear from everyone, I'm going to assume everything is pretty much copacetic, that everything is pretty much fine. We have about a minute before you guys go on break for a few minutes. So practice test 7 for this week. Again, if you have particular grammar questions, I do want you to email me so we can go over them next time. I haven't gone through every grammar concept because there just isn't that much time in this course to be able to do that. But we may also be creating a kind of a grammar video series for those of you interested in learning more about grammar. But I'll keep you updated on that as that happens. So for now, just make sure you come in with your questions about grammar, look through different concepts, kind of isolate whether or not you need to go over subject-verb agreement, or whether or not you need to know what an appositive phrase is, or anything like that. Okay, so make sure that you are practicing the techniques and keep at it. Just practice makes perfect with this test, and I know all of you are going to do amazing with this test.
Okay, so thanks for watching, and please remember to contact us at info@embracetutoring.com to set up any personalized private tutoring sessions you would like. Stay tuned for future videos, and best of luck with your studies. We definitely encourage you to visit our Instagram as well as TikTok pages if you have any questions along the way. Take care, guys. Best of luck with your studies.